5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Find yourself a booth, order up a cold one. This is the Spring Bar.
Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 with Michael Benavente, the Spring Bar podcast. We're continuing our conversations with moon watches. And in particular, we're focusing today on Accutron. And Accutron is, like you had mentioned in the first part, has a big reach in space history and space travel. And one watch really in particular that you're here to talk about. And I'll let you take the spotlight a little bit here and just kind of tell us what it is that we're going to be discussing today.
What are
Michael.
we talking about?
Yeah.
So as we chatted earlier, it's not only Bulova that had its day in the sun, so to speak. Accutron also did, starting from 1960, and it was really, Accutron that was fully embedded in all of these 46 different missions that we went to space, and that was because with the launch of the Human Fork movement and the first electronic movement in 1960, we in essence became the world's most accurate watch, at the moment from that happening. And so who more than the military and space travelers need the most accurate time. And so they all looked to Accutron for that. And so we were embedded, we were on people's wrists. And certainly Bulova being father to Accutron's son, because there's always a question about what's the relationship. Well, Bulova, we're soon going to be 150 years old in 2025. And so we were around, Bulova was around a lot longer than Accutron was, but Accutron was born in 1960. And that came through the labor and love of the Bulova brand. And really Omar Bradley, who was the last 5-star general in the US military, who then becomes the chairman of Bulova Watch Company. And so Accutron very quickly, from becoming the world's most accurate watch at that point, gets a lot of attention in cockpits, both in commercial flight and also in military planes, test planes. Joe, I know a lot of the history in terms of, and probably the listeners that listen to this podcast know very well, how deeply entrenched, Accutron was. And so with us launching and having such great success with the Bulova Lunar Pilot, and then having relaunched Accutron as a standalone brand again, which is how it was in 1960, again in 2020, we started with the breakthrough electrostatic movement in 2020, with that as a big calling card. We also started with our legacy collection, which is really all about design, and then using our Swiss-made movements in that collection. And then, we had a little bit to deal with COVID in between, because we launched Accutron in 2020 during the craziness. And so now we've had some time to look at what the next leg of the table will be, if you think about, the collection of in Accutron, and that's certainly in the astronaut, collection. And so we're very happy to announce today, and today being when this episode's coming out, the day that we're really showcasing our new relaunch of Astronaut. And I don't think it's going to be too revolutionary, only in the fact that we're paying homage to the original. And I think, Joe, you may be wearing one of the originals.
I've got mine here. And there's a whole lot that you can say about this watch, and just with the way that it comes across, the wrist presence. They're fantastic to wear. It's such a good package.
Why don't you put it on?
I can't because we're still in the one watch challenge, and I've got a couple more days left before I can let that go, if I haven't done so already. So I mean, talking about Accutron, talking about the astronaut and part of the history that goes in with this watch, there'd been the movement from moving from the mechanical watch into the electric watch, and Hamilton had done the electric, but those watches caught on fire and they didn't do quite so well. And Accutron comes out, 58, 57 with Max Herzel and the development of the tuning fork, just the level of accuracy that came from that, and the military applications for that are just immediate, because you talk about the longitude problem and the development of the marine chronometer and all the history that goes into watchmaking, and this is really the next evolution away before quartz, because quartz was in its infancy, but it wasn't quite ready yet. This was the next step. It was the next hurdle. And so looking at this watch from a variety of standpoints, the anti-magnetic, the resistance to heat, temperature compensation, all of these different bits and pieces that go on with the Accutron movement, the 214 movement in particular. As the military application goes on, like the history is, as the CIA was developing the SR-71 and the Project Oxcart, that the test pilots were wearing watches. The heat level was so extreme in the cockpit, they weren't able to wear a regular watch. And so these watches were issued by the CIA to the test pilots and then became part of the sort of the standard kit. But that means that it enters into the test pilot repertoire, for lack of a better term. And so, we know Gordon Cooper wore one on Mercury, and he was a test pilot as well. So this watch had been really well known throughout the military test pilots going into the space race. And that's with part of the term, it is called the astronaut. It's there for a reason. Astronauts wore it. So like in terms of a package, it's got the GMT hand. It's got the sweep second hand. It's got a really, really high contrast dial. It's got the unidirectional bezel with a 24-hour timer on the outside. It's such a killer watch. It's so good. And it honestly is really iconic. So the Accutron was making a variety of different colorways. You've got different cases, different metals, different dial, slightly different configurations. There's so many options for it. So when you're talking about looking at relaunching and you're looking at another pillar, is that kind of where we were looking at? Just the fact that this watch was so iconic?
Definitely. I mean, it's so important in the history of the brands.
Right.
And so wanting to really make sure that we, every time we do these reissues, it's really, and people have asked over the years, some people have even like put it down in a way and said, oh, it's a lazy way, you guys are just living, blah, 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 blah. And I said, okay, that's fine. But there's not a lot of there are no watches available, to either people who get interested in this or younger generations. I mean, unless we issue these watches, there'd be no way for people to ever have the joy of experiencing them. And so people can take the negative approach on that, but I look at it as, I have 4 children myself, and, my youngest guys are 22 and they're twins. And so how do 22-year-olds or 25-year-olds or 30-year-olds, today get the joy of experiencing a watch like a Lunar Pilot in Bulova or now the Astronaut, unless we go back and remake it. It's a little bit, if we get out of our industry, it's like what they did when there was the opportunity to digitize film, right? Some old films that were really damaged, had not been taken care of, through the magic of digitization, they were able to kind of bring these films back and have all new generations enjoy it. Same thing with music. We've been involved in Bulova with some music projects in which, we've taken music that was damaged in floods, from the blues era, and they were able to, restore them and bring them back. Why? Not because people can't make new music. Of course they can make new music, although somebody will argue that new music sucks, but that's a whole other story. Sorry. But, these are classics. So I guess under the heading of classics, we really, are really excited about bringing back the Astronaut, and we're bringing it back in very much the purest way. It's a GMT. It'll be Swiss. It'll have the day-night, unidirectional bezel. The bracelet is very reminiscent of what you have on your wrist, Joe.
Yeah. There's always the question of like, so the original bracelets were, there was the bullet band, and then there was this large coffin link. And that's the iconic bracelet. I've actually seen on occasion some of the bracelets cost more than the watches. It's a phenomenal thing. So trying to get them for the right time in the right space. But if it's issued that way, it's meant to be great.
It's actually the bullet bracelet, Joe.
That's gonna be fantastic. That's gonna be so good.
I didn't tell you that earlier when we were off air because I wanted to get your reaction on air, but you're not that excited.
I love it. No, I love it. I absolutely do, because the bullet bracelet. It's an iconic bracelet. It was used across the industry in a variety of different ways, but on the Astronaut by itself, it's really hard to beat that as a package.
And they did the team did a great job. I mean, the team did a great job. I mean, the bracelet looks really, really great on it.
So like you had alluded to before a minute ago, Joe, there's many different versions and varieties of the Astronaut, but the one that you guys are releasing right now, Michael, excuse me, is the gorgeous day-night model.
That day-night bezel.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, that's without question. That's the choice. That's the way to go.
There's the Accutron Astronaut, and then there's the Astronaut Day-Night. I mean, that's like the holy grail of the astronauts.
It is. It really is.
And this is day-night.
Yeah.
This is the day-night version. So day-night version, bullet bracelet, and limited to 300 pieces worldwide. So
that's fantastic.
There's not a lot of them. Of course, they're all numbered, as we always do. Somebody told me, and I have to pay attention more, maybe I just always assume, but somebody told me a lot of companies are not numbering watches. They'll say
it seems to be the case. It really does seem to be the case. You got people that aren't doing that. And I like the numbering personally. I like to know that.
Yeah, Seiko's really bad about that. They'll launch a limited edition and then they won't freaking number it.
Yeah. I mean, to me, if you don't number them, there's really no provenance on what you have. I mean, at least if you have number 3 of 300, then I mean, there's no disputing the fact it's 3 of 300, right?
Yeah, which I guess maybe that's why Mike's being so close guarded with those
coy.
Numbers.
He's being so coy about the number of his watch.
Oh, you're talking about the previous episode. Yes.
Yes.
For those of you who are listening to this episode, you may not know, you'll have to go back to the previous episode to understand what happened. I'm taking over the podcast, guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the best plug we've had. Oh my God. That's going to be the blurb. That's fantastic.
But, I slight side tangent here. Certainly, I think Bulova is a master of, Michael was speaking to how younger generations can connect with these timepieces. And I think Bulova does that very well. So I think I've heard that, watch design, it's more so instead of form follows function, it's fiction follows form. And with Bulova, they're able to incorporate their history so eloquently into watches. And for an example,
the veterans watchmakers.
Exactly. Like, all right, so I'm 27, relatively young, and I can still connect to veterans past, through this watch. And I don't have to have been through, World War II to feel what these soldiers, these men and women had felt while they were wearing this watch. And I've worn this in uniform, and I look down and sometimes I think back to, especially when I'm like complaining about a current situation, I'm like, well, what would the men and women wearing this watch have done? Probably shut up and deal with it, right? And that's the power of these watches.
We should have, I'm already inviting myself back again another time, but all kidding aside, we should have an episode on the Veterans Watchmaker Initiative.
We need to do that. We totally need to do that. Yeah.
And I promise I won't even speak on that episode because Sam, you want to talk about storytelling? Oh my God. Sam has some incredible stories.
Everything
we
that we've
can
heard about
change the name of the podcast. We can be the Bulova podcast.
We probably could.
Well, Bulova doesn't currently have a podcast, so I mean, we can talk about that later.
Branding opportunity. But we're talking about the Astronaut. So you had to go through this iconic watch. And there was the Accutron 2, the Moon View, which came out as like 42 millimeters. It has the precisionist movement within it. It's a nice package, but it's just not quite the same. So when you're talking about the design features, like how did you go from that sort of moon view reissue back to the astronaut reissue? Like, what was looking back at the originals and trying to make it as close as possible?
Yeah. I mean, it was very much on how we looked at the legacy collection when we relaunched it for the 2020 relaunch of Accutron. I mean, we wanted to go back and just be true to the original. We didn't want it gimmicks, and so we went right back to the GMT with Swiss Alita movement, which is a nice GMT, and it's really pretty much in the same vein as the original. And so, again, what I originally said, we get new generation of folks, or maybe new enthusiasts who weren't around to get very close to the original watch.
But what's nice too
is same sizes too, right? So we're sub 40, that whole bit, rather than being larger like a 42.
Yeah, and it's going to be very close to the original size.
That's such a good. It's always a good choice. I mean, we talked about that in the previous episode. That as close as you can stay to the original, you can't argue. Nobody can argue about that. It's like, oh, well, that's not what it.
Yeah, no, it's not going to be 44. No, don't.
Right. Well, and the thing that's so strange, like the bezel on the original, it's thin, but it still wears incredibly well. And we had a previous guest on, Lauren at Watchmaker's Daughter, who has essentially the same watch that I do, and she wears it. Her wrist is thinner than mine, and it still looks fantastic. So regardless of the size of this, like it works almost as a unisex piece. And I think that just raises the appeal of the watch across the board. And like it's you're hitting that Goldilocks space. And we've talked about that before. But this idea is like it's just right. It's gonna be so good. It's gonna be so good.
That's why I'm such a big fan of reissues, because like you say, it provides that opportunity for, and not only the younger generation, I'm not a younger generation, but I wasn't around when these were being produced originally. And I have the opportunity now to buy it brand new and enjoy it as if I bought it in the era that it originally came out.
With a warranty.
And waterproof.
And waterproof.
Sapphire crystal, which you wouldn't have gotten back then.
We've talked off camera, and you've alluded to this coming down. And as soon as I started to hear that, it's just like it's gonna be so good. It's gonna be so good. I can't believe though that it took this long to get back to that. And so we've talked about the archive series. We've talked about how the reissues go. And I know that we're coming up on a big anniversary for Bulova. And so are we going to be expecting more of this type of thing? Are there other options in the works that are going to dazzle and surprise everyone?
We definitely are working really hard on the 150th anniversary launch, which really will start probably dropping some stories at the end of 24. So 24 will really be let's call it Q4 of 24. We'll start dropping our first stories that will be celebrating, the whole, the beginning of 25 and the anniversary of 150 years of Bulova, being really the oldest American watch brand based in the United States continuously. I mean,
continuously. It's such a, you look at the history of American watchmaking, and I know that there's been this big movement, and they talk about British watchmaking. There's the whole Swiss movements and how the Swiss watchmaking industry, and going back to Calvinism, blah, 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 blah. But the American watchmaking story, going from the pocket watches and the railroad watches and the prominence that American watchmaking had in the 1800s into the early 1900s, as we move forward now, the fact that Bulova has been so prominent for 125 years, and you start looking as, okay, what have they done? The history of firsts, if you will, that Bulova has done. And you're looking at advertising, you're looking at integrated manufacturing, you're looking at serial manufacturing, you're looking at the tuning fork movement, you're looking at all of these things. It's such a phenomenal story, and I don't know that it gets just enough credit And it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad because it's such a good story.
Well, I mean, there's the part where, we don't make watches in the United States anymore, but, it's certainly not, it's certainly not because we don't want to. We would love to, but that's something that at the moment is not really available to us. But the company in the case of Bulova has only ever been based in actually not only the United States, but only in New York City.
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, above and beyond, it's a fantastic story. I mean, when people would ask me what's the coolest part or what's the most enjoyable part of working at Bulova, I say, well, how many people get to work on a brand that's been in existence, uninterrupted? Every January 2nd, someone comes in and opens up the door for, soon to be 150 years. There's not many brands, forget about watches. There's not many brands in the United States that can say that. All of the company is based in New York. And so, we're owned by Citizen Watch Group Holdings, and they're in Tokyo. But, Bulova brand and Accutron brand, we're all in New York. I mean, everything emanates out of the New York office, and design and strategy and all that. And so at least that's still, American, for the time being, and has always been, for the brand, even when right. They had to shift production back in the 70s to other places.
So there's the association between the vintage model and this new release. The vintage model's got the tuning fork movement. The new release is going to have a Solita mechanical movement. And the decision behind that, what was kind of the impetus? The fact that there really aren't too many tuning fork movements to be had?
There are none. I mean, there are none.
Speaking for somebody who's had to have them serviced, it's difficult to do. It's really hard to get those suckers done,
There are none. Also, many people don't realize, again, including myself before I joined the company, that the size of the business that Bulova had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in Switzerland. We had very big facilities in Switzerland. We were very much involved in Switzerland. Actually, the tuning fork movement was a joint venture with really Max Hetchel, who was the engineer in Switzerland, and our team, in the United States. And so whenever we look at movements to use, and there's such a huge plethora of choices, but every once in a while we do like to pay respect to the time that Bulova was in Switzerland. And so the Joseph Bulova collection is Swiss made. This new reissue of the Accutron Astronaut is Swiss made. And so when it makes sense, we try to keep that thread, going.
But that harkens back to the original, because there were the Accutron USA movements, and then there were the Accutron Swiss movements, and there's subtle differences between the two. The astronaut world is it's a real minefield, because the watches are old, they've been repaired, they've been so trying to find one that's all original, knowing what the difference is between the Swiss styles, Swiss movements versus American dials, American movements, the difference in the case manufacturers. Like I've tripped down that rabbit hole a couple of times, and it's awkward. It can be really hard, and there's arguments of like, no, that's the wrong 24-hour hand, and those dial plots aren't exactly right, and there's multiple pages of discussion that goes on to it. So it's kind of nice that we're looking at an original Swiss coming out that's going to be correct, and that nobody's going to really be able to argue with, and it's going to have a warranty, and it's going to have all of the backing of the company, and it's going to be a whole lot easier to repair. And I can applaud the choice of the mechanical movement over, say, an electronic or quartz movement, just from a servicing standpoint. The fact that in 20 years, somebody's still going to be able to fix that. And it's a good move. It's a good move on the corporation's part, without question.
Yeah. And the popularity also, I mean, there's such a popularity in terms of mechanical watches. So we always know, there's going to be folks that are interested in mechanical. But I think for us, we see this reissue of the Astronaut as a beginning, not the end. And so the first one, again, there'll only be 300, but, we really see building out, the whole Astronaut story and series. So you could see us coming back down the road, with some different iterations of the astronaut. Maybe we'll get fun, maybe we'll, have some fun with some color, something different that hasn't been done before, but inspired by the astronaut. Maybe, who even knows, a tuning fork movement somewhere down the road. You never know.
Oh, don't tease. Don't tease. That's just rude. It's just because
it's the beginning.
It is. So the thing that's always been fascinating when you look at the astronaut watches, the steel case black dial is pretty much iconic. The day-night bezel is the most aspirational one. But there were the yellow gold, there were the champagne dials, there were white dials, there were all of these different color options. And so that's something you're thinking about down the line.
Totally. I mean, we would love. I mean, and some of those are even much rarer than even what we've just reissued. So there's so much fun that we can have. And really within the Accutron line today, it's a pretty tight collection. It's not very broad. And so adding that pillar, electrostatic, legacy, and astronaut really gives us, another place to play and still, have a direct tie to our roots.
I mean, all three of us are pretty well established in the vintage space. And I'm looking on a daily basis on what's currently offered, what's available, what watches are showing up, and I'm always surprised by something that I see on any auction site. It's like, okay, I've never seen that before. This is brand new. I'll send it to Mike. I'll send it to Casey. He's like, look at this. Have you ever seen this? And Accutron's offerings from the 60s, it was so broad. I mean, I can't even imagine how many SKUs there were from the time that they began to where it ended. It's like, that's just the number of watches, the number of iterations, dial changes, handset changes, movement changes, case shape. Oh my gosh. It's phenomenal what the company was able to put out. And that's without, not even looking at back into the history of Bulova, which goes back so much further. And the number of different versions and brands that were there. So like the idea of focus with Accutron just a little bit, it makes sense. And I can see it from a marketing standpoint that makes it a whole lot easier to tell that story consistently and concisely.
We have the same thing happen to us. I mean, we have Carl Rosen, who is our historian and a former employee. Worked for the company for 30 years. But we'll get stuff and we'll see stuff. And even Carl will be like, I never even saw that one before, so, they were making, the output was pretty great, but not always a lot. So, some things went out and not that many were made of certain items. And then they just pop up online sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's always so interesting to see, like, something shows up, it's like, oh, that's new and different. And you have to take the look. It's like, okay, has it been restored? Has it been repaired? How original is it? What's the legacy? What's the Provence and all the rest of it? So you alluded the fact that the new astronaut is going to be 300 pieces. And this was something we've talked about before, that the limited edition is kind of going to be sort of the byword for parts of the company as you move forward. We're still continuing on with that. That's part of how the new releases are going to work kind of across the board.
Not always. I mean, not always, but I think in this particular case, as we were, again, coming back with the watch and its original, format, we want to kind of establish, okay, here we are, this is pretty close to what the original was, with the bullet bracelet and everything else size, but now as we roll forward, and again, maybe some of these other iterations may not be limited. Maybe we'll make some that, will be, a little bit more wider available. Then kind of like we did the mill ship, we did a limited edition version, and then, we kind of made a regular version that was a little bit spec down, in terms of different spec, but still always available. Because to me, some of these historic watches are it's important that we always have them. It helps tell the story, right? So an A11 or, the hack,
right. Yeah.
Oceanographer. I mean, all of these different stories along the way. I think it's always important to have some of those in the line all the time and attainable and not you know.
It totally makes sense. Look, I mean, looking at the depth is sort of the greatest hits, that you want to have access to those without question. And I think you guys have positioned yourself really well. A lot of the reissues that have come out and the heritage that is being expressed, I think that it's a really great piece. It's a really great availability for people to get accessibility into the heritage of the Bulova line, to look at what was available back in history and to modernize it a little bit, to make it not necessarily last longer, because, you know, I've got watches that are 50, 60, not quite 100 years old, but close, and they're still serviceable. So, you know, to have that next generation, know that my son will be able to wear some of those watches for a long time. That's really nice. And it's nice to have that same continuity that goes on throughout the line.
So it's such an important part, that last point that you made, Joe. You know, the heirloom aspect of it. We get so many, you know, comments, you know, on social media in terms of, you know, people really like to buy watches today, already thinking about, you know, their kids or their grandkids, and wanting even a Bulova. Okay, it doesn't always have to be a Patek Philippe, you know, that people have that in mind, you know, to be able to pass down. And we definitely think in those terms when we're doing things.
You know, kudos to the company for really looking at the heritage and trying to make it really, really comfortable and just good on you.
Yeah, it's, and I'm still here, by the way. Joe is.
It's the Joe Show.
Yeah,
I got something to say.
Joe is such a wealth of knowledge on the Accutrons, but especially the Astronaut, and so I just kind of let him go and do his thing. But AccutronWatch.com. The legacy line is there. I mean, you guys have already come out with some great stuff. The Q is my favorite. Yeah. You have the Alpha cases, you have the Elvis watch, you have railroad watches, and now this edition, which is, like you said, is going to open up so many avenues for you guys to explore, and then even beyond in different models too. What you're getting, the heritage, the history, everything involved with this piece. I mean, just the astronaut of all astronauts. It's going to be very well bought for whoever, you know, decides to go down this road. We've talked off air about future offerings that are coming up that we're really excited about, and definitely looking forward to having you back and discussing all that kind of stuff too. So, as always, Michael, we genuinely appreciate having you on. We appreciate you donating your time to us to be, you know, coming on and discussing things. And in this case today, previewing and debuting an all-new piece. You know, we appreciate the opportunity to be that outlet and bring this information to our viewers and our listeners. And we very much look forward to having you back on again. Anytime, you're always welcome.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mike, Joe, KC. I really appreciate your enthusiasm, and I know that you guys are our best supporters. So I will try to do my best to support you all as best as I can. And certainly the company is very appreciative also of your enthusiasm and your loyalty. And so I look forward to the next time, where I know we're going to have some fun. A little talk.
Yep.
If you let me tease it, I'm going to say we're going to talk certainly about precisionist, but some new developments in that, and a whole new family that's coming back.
That's fantastic. It's going to be so good.
For it. Very much.
It's going to be so good.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Until next time, thank you very much, Michael. Everybody, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.